Holy. Let us jump in, shall we? Hey everyone, what's going on? Back with a brand new video, and it is a much anticipated video as my favorite author, Stephen King, he has released his newest book, a collection of short stories, 12 as a matter of fact, and it is called You Like It Darker. This is the American cover version of it. The UK version is actually not that bad, but I do prefer the American version. We are going to dive into all 12 stories of this book. I give this star right off the back 5 stars. It is a great book. Now, at the time before I read the last story, which we'll get to that in a minute, I was gonna put it at 4 stars, but with Stephen King, he always finds a way to, you know, again, entice me, bring me into the story, and again, I love what he does, I love what he writes, and again, a lot of these stories he's put in are either new stories that he has never published, or there's a couple of them in here that, for example, The Answer Man, that was actually a story he started back in his 30s, and he had a friend that actually suggested, hey, you need to finish this story, it's really good. So he ended up doing that, and he also talks about that in his afterword too. So I'm ready, I'm excited to dive into each story. I'm not going to give you my overall ranking of each one, that's why I gave it as a whole 5 stars for this. But we are going to start with the first story in this, and it is called Two Talented Bastids. And as I said, Bastids, it's like that Boston accent of bastards. A thing I used to hear that my dad used to share as I was a kid, that with Boston people and their accents, and I'm not making fun of them, but it's funny because we used to listen to this show called Car Talk.
They're reversed.
Again.
What are the chances of that? And the question is...
Only in a puzzler would this happen. Don't try this at home, folks.
Now, if you think you know the answer, write it on a postcard or on the back of a $21 bill and send it to Puzzler Tower, Car Talk Plaza, Box 3500, Harvard Square, Cambridge.
Our fair city.
Matt 02238.
And the two brothers were from Massachusetts, and anytime they'd either say car keys, it could sound like khakis, like khaki pants. If they ever said, hey, I lost my khakis, it has that Boston accent to it, so I always thought that was funny with this. But in Two Talented Bastids, it is a story about a guy named Pop and his friend Joe. Now, the story is told from the point of view of Pop's son, but the point of view also does change back to Pop during the story. There is a multiple point of view narrative with this story, but I did really enjoy it because as the son is telling him about before his father passed away, Pop and Joe grew up together. Again, they're longtime friends, and they actually go out and they find this mysterious type of artifact. I'm not going to give any spoilers like I always mention, and when Pop's son tells the story, he again is actually seeing it where, like, when his father came back home, he looked like he saw a ghost, and he saw something that he didn't want to talk about, and he held it to his grave until Pop left a note for his son to look when he, again, on his deathbed when he was passing away, that he is going to read the story of what they encountered during that day. Very interesting story. Again, lots of twists and turns with it, and I really liked it a lot. Story number 2 is called The Fifth Step, and this centers on a character named Harold Jameson. And Harold Jameson is a retired man, but not only is he retired, he is also struggling with his past as he is, again, trying to enjoy his retirement. While he is sitting in the park one day, he encounters this stranger. This stranger who wants to offer his confession. Harold is on the park bench there, so he is actually, you know, why the hell not? Let's have an open ear. What do you got to say? As Harold listens to the stranger talk about a story about AA, and really his past is kind of, you know, haunting him as well, and he's trying to fight and battle the urge of it, Harold also confesses his secrets and his sins to this man as well. So as the story is progressing and as Harold is actually trying to, you know, get off a lot of stuff off of his chest, he finds that this stranger is not really sympathetic to what he's trying to tell, but he's become more sinister by the minute. Harold realizes that not only has he confessed his sins to a person who basically doesn't give a crap about it, but he is talking to someone who has very sadistic and sinister ideas and thoughts, and the ending of this was, well, let's just say, quick and to the point. It was a quick story, but again, I did enjoy it. It's not my favorite out of them, but again, it was a good story to throw in there, you know, not so long, but not so short as well. Story number 3 is called Willie the Weirdo. Now, Willie the Weirdo, again, it's a story about a peculiar boy named Willie, and it also centers around him and his grandpa. Willie spends his days, you know, kind of viewing the world as it is and, you know, through different perspectives, but he's also listened to the stories that his grandpa is telling him as well. So as Willie's grandpa is telling him the stories start to get darker and darker and darker. Hence the name. During the story, when Willie is listening to his grandpa and he is actually listening to it, he's kind of getting this, like, not urge, but he's getting this, you know, kind of thrill and kind of like excited by the stories that his grandpa is telling him. So Willie the Weirdo is, you know, a weird guy from, you know, just enjoying the stuff that he's listening to, and just the imagination that this kid is going through during the story is ridiculous. So Willie's journey during this, and again, I'm not going to give away the plot of the story. This is another short one. It's very unsettling and thought-provoking. This is showcasing King's, you know, ability to make those characters that, you know, have very dark, sinister ideas. And again, even with this being a very short story, it has a really good ending, but it also has like kind of like a cliffhanger ending as well. Not like it's someone's going to add on to it, but you could think about what's going to happen after you read the last sentence of the story. Alright, now we're on to Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. In this story, this is one of the longer ones in the book, and this is actually the first one you get to when you read in chronological order. So Danny is this custodian who works at this school over the summer as he's maintaining and keeping it up to date, you know, keeping it clean, you know, doing the floors, all that stuff that maintenance people do. This story is based on Danny having a very vivid dream, and as he has this vivid dream, when he comes to, obviously, as he wakes up, he finds to kind of go where that dream has taken him, and he finds out that his dream is not wrong. Kind of like seeing the future in a way, but he's not obviously, you know, a psychic or anything. Danny calls 911 from a burner phone, so he doesn't want to get his identity, you know, obviously search back to this or trace back to where he's calling it. So he calls to see where he has found, obviously I'm not going to tell what happened, but he finds something that he needs to call 911 because he's having this gut feeling where he has to do something about this because the dream that he has had is actually a true event. And then once the discovery sets off and actually the police go to where Danny has said that he had found what has happened, he actually gets all this stuff traced back to him, even though he has tried not to have all that stuff. After all this stuff is getting traced back to Danny, a very obsessive detective Jalbert, he becomes really obsessed with Danny and trying to figure out and trying to link clues to see if this incident or accident, whatever you want to call it, is traced back to Danny. It's a very back and forth story. You know, there are some twists and turns with it. I did enjoy it. This is a very psychological story that King wrote, and I do like how he creates a character who's trying to be the hero of the story, but then he's starting to end up being the victim of the story because he has this detective that is hounding him, and it's just back and forth throughout this whole story until the end. I'll leave that for you to see once you read it, but Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, a very good story. Again, one of the first longer stories of the book, but I do like this one as well, and it was a great read overall. The next story, and the fifth story in line, is called Finn. Finn is about a young Irishman who is actually cursed or just has a curse of bad luck with them. So Finn's life is actually like a series of unfortunate events. At the age of 19, Finn is actually mistaken for someone else, and he's actually captured or kidnapped by gangsters. Again, this is another psychological, you know, thriller or roller coaster he goes on to. He's trying to figure out, obviously, all this misfortune that's happening to him. What is going on? Why is all this bad luck, you know, going with him and kind of bringing him into all this? So the central theme of this is Finn, his resilience to obviously struggle and to fight back and try to survive through the story is the overall theme of this as he's going through and trying to, again, overcome this bad luck that he just keeps happening. Finn was not a bad story, not my favorite, but again, another short one to add to the collection, and we're just going to keep moving on from here. The next story is actually kind of one of my favorites, and it is called On Slide In Road. During this story, a family travels through a desolate area to visit a dying relative. As they are traveling through, they, you know, encounter car trouble, kind of like, you know, that predictable kind of like trope that's going to happen. The family members consist of the mother, the father, son and daughter, and also the grandfather. So the father's dad, I believe it is. So the grandpa is actually pretty funny in the story. He's really witty. During the story, the grandpa is very witty and very clever because he uses his wittiness to, again, try to save his family. But during On Slide In Road, the family, the brother and sister, they encounter these two strangers, and these two strangers are like, oh, you need help with your car? Let us help. And then they go, obviously, meet the family, and then things start to take a very dark turn from there, and I'm going to leave it there for you to figure it out. Very good story. I did enjoy this one. Again, middle of the pack, not super long, not super short, but it was a good range and a very good story to read. Recommend this book. If you made it this far, again, hit that subscribe button. I appreciate your support. And again, keep chugging along with me. We're about halfway through these stories. The next story is called Red Screen. Now, funny enough how I'm wearing red. Wasn't even planning that. A police detective named Mark interviews this guy who claims to have killed his wife. And the reason why he has killed his wife is because he feels like she was possessed by an alien entity or some kind of, supernatural being. So the man who is, again, obviously interviewed by the detective. So the man who is interviewed by Mark, he's describing that his wife is changing, and the changes that are occurring with her aren't very normal. And what happens is, after Mark does what he does in the story, without giving spoilers, he starts to realize that his wife is actually starting to change in a different way as well. At first, Mark was very skeptical. He didn't feel like this guy was just a crazy guy. As Mark's wife was starting to deal with these weird, strange occurrences and changes, Mark was starting to kind of believe that the man's story was actually might be true. Red Screen is actually a combination of sci-fi and psychological horror. And I will admit that even though this wasn't one of my favorites, I did like the ending of this because, again, don't want to give any spoilers, even though it's so hard not to try to talk about this book. But the way it happens, and if you really read into it, and you kind of see why it's called Red Screen, you'll kind of understand. So the next one we're diving into is called the Turbulence Expert. This one deals with a man named Tom, and he has a very unique job in this story. He is not only tasked with, flying the airplanes, but he is also in charge of calming passengers down when they are going through turbulence. So as the story overall takes place, there's a meaning to this story because what Tom does as he is talking to the passengers, it feels like that when he is calming them down during the turbulence, that things start to go better for everyone on the plane, which is weird to say, but it seems like he kind of has like this superpower. If he talks about and calms people down, everything's fine, the plane ride goes good. So this story really explores the psychological horror of like what people have and fears and how they kind of this story deals with the psychological horror with people and how people cope with their fears. And I really enjoy that. For those who've been on a plane and been through turbulence, the story was actually really clever what King did to make a character tell a story, not really tell a story, but to talk through, the overhead loudspeakers, whatever you want to call it, to the passengers, kind of calming them down and just making that big difference. Good story overall. I did enjoy it, and again, another quick one as well. The next one we are diving into is Laurie, and Laurie is a dog story. If you don't know about Stephen King loves his corgis. However, in this story, we are not dealing with a corgi. We are dealing with a border collie mix puppy, and the main character in this story is named Lloyd. So Lloyd receives this border collie mix puppy from his sister. Kind of generalization, like when a person doesn't really want a dog, but like deep down in their heart, they're like, oh, I'm kind of glad I have this dog. That's basically what Laurie is. Lloyd starts off, like, oh, what do I got to do with this puppy? I got to clean up after it. It's pissing all over the floor and on the pad. And then over time in the story, Lloyd and Laurie, they're like best buds. Go everywhere together. They go for a walk. And then, however, that walk leads into, like, you would think, like, wow, this story is kind of boring. It's just him and his dog. Nothing's really happening. But bam! Comes out of nowhere. And then that's where the danger happens. Again, it is a great story of a friendship. The bond between, again, a man's best friend. So I really liked how King added that to him. Though King was really talking about like the human experience with this, obviously with the dog, and with obviously Lloyd growing closer to it. But then he has the darker side and twist of what happens in the story, and you have to find out about what happens. All right, the next one we are going to talk about, I will say it's either my first or my second favorite of this, and it is called Rattlesnakes. Now, Rattlesnakes is the sequel to Cujo. So, if you have not read Cujo, well, first, I recommend that you read Cujo before you read this. Obviously, referenced very well. I like when King does, he does his flashbacks and he does his reference points very well. And this was a great story overall. So this story follows Vic Trenton. He is actually a widower. And Vic is actually traveling down to Florida, I believe, to obviously, trying to find some peace, some solace, just to be away from it all. But instead of going to Florida, Vic inherits this house on Rattlesnake Key, which is a place where dark things have happened. So as things, are bouncing back, he has the, the small references from Cujo. The house in Rattlesnake's Key is actually a house that is haunted by 2 children who were killed by a whole swarm of rattlesnakes. So Vic encounters this character named Allie Bell, and Allie Bell is actually the mother of the 2 deceased children. The children have died years and years ago, but even though they died years and years ago, Allie still pushes the stroller around with obviously thinking that, they're still alive. She's having a hard time mourning with the losses of her 2 children. So she is pushing around this squeaky buggy that is just going around and around, and then hopefully and obviously feel like that these 2 children are still with her. So this story intertwines with guilt, grief, and the supernatural entity. I'm not going to obviously tell you what happens, but the big thing to follow through with this story is the squeaky stroller. And with Vic and the stroller, and then a detective comes into play. It's such a great story, and I love reading it. And I haven't read Cujo. I get the reference points through it, so I do recommend that you read Cujo before you read Rattlesnakes, if you do want to obviously understand it more thoroughly. All right, everyone, thanks for sticking with me. We're down to our last 2 stories. The next story is called The Dreamers. The Dreamers features a Vietnam vet named Jack, who actually takes on a very mysterious and odd job. So again, this is like another psychological one that you really have to think about. So Jack answers this ad for a position at this remote facility. As Jack takes this job, he really figures out that this is kind of like look at a reality at itself, and like as a whole, he's trying to obviously question his own ability and just in a way. So again, it's very psychological. It's playing a lot of things in a mind, very mind control game kind of. So Jack is taking this job. He's kind of tampering with like the unknown and like the consequences that come with, you know, diving into the unknown or what you're not supposed to know about. And then he gets the, you know, the repercussion of what happens after it. So it's like, do what you do, but if you do something, then obviously bad shit's gonna happen. So that's kind of what this story is about. It really messes with your mind as you read it. I guess it was alright. I mean, I did enjoy all this as a whole. So as Jack goes deeper into this job and he's starting to find answers and he's starting to, you know, find these clues, he's figuring out that certain things are kind of better left unsaid and left alone. And again, that's where I'm going to leave that little cliffhanger for you to figure that one out. And then we are at the final one, and this story is the one, as I mentioned briefly in the intro, of why I gave this overall You Like It Darker 5 stars. And this last story is called The Answer Man. So this story dives in and talking about Phil, who is a lawyer, and again, this guy has also have a very troubling past. Kind of a certain theme throughout the stories. So this actually was really interesting because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this story was taking place pre-World War II. Bill actually obviously is not a lawyer right off the bat. That becomes his job. So again, he goes to war, goes to battle, gets a wife, gets a child, marries, all that stuff. So all the family business. So that's happening. The twist of this story is the Answer Man himself. So the Answer Man pops up in 3 different times in Phil's life. And when he pops up, he's like this old man, gray hair, and he looks the same every time Phil sees him. Now, Phil's age is changing over time, but the Answer Man is actually staying the same age, which is really cool. So as Phil encounters the Answer Man is charging, obviously, 3 minutes for a certain amount of dollars to ask him any questions, and he will give him the answer, yes, yes, no, yes, certain stuff like that. Phil thinks it's some kind of a crock, so he doesn't really do it, and then he comes back to him because he's kind of drawn into him. He talks to the Answer Man, figures out these certain questions, and then he's kind of questioning, like, alright, he's questioning his life about what's going to happen, and dealing obviously with his family, his career. So then later on, he goes through obviously a very bad tragedy. I'm not going to say it, but he goes through something bad, finds the Answer Man again, runs into him. It's just a weird way of it working, goes on again, and then at the end of the story, one last time, as Phil, old man, I think he has a dog with him as well, could be mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong. At the end, he finds the Answer Man one last time, and it's free charges for as many questions as he wants. So he answered these questions, and like the way King wrote this story out, and again, this was the one where King had a friend, or I think it might have been a cousin, where I read in the afterward saying that he said, you should keep writing this. You should finish this story. It's a great story. And I'm glad he did, because again, he started the Answer Man in his 30s and he left it unfinished until he's now what, 76? That's crazy, but it's awesome that he finished it, and I really enjoyed reading it. Alright, that is it, everyone. Make sure you check out You Like It Darker if you are a Stephen King fanatic just like I am. I highly recommend it. Again, 12 stories in this book. Some are great, some are alright, okay? So you're going to have your hit or miss with it, but overall, like I mentioned over and over again, like a broken record, 5 stars for me. Big King fan. Again, I'm still collecting over in the back behind me as much King as I can get. So, highly recommend it. If you have not checked it out, again, borrow it from a friend. You will not be disappointed. There is at least one story in here that you are probably going to like, so go check it out. Alright, everyone, that is it. Thank you for stopping by. I would like to mention before I go that if you want to check out right about here, that is the poster. That is my sequel that I just released yesterday. It is available on Amazon in ebook and paperback. I will do a separate video for my book once I get the author copies, but I just wanted to let you know, if you made it to the end of this video, I thank you so much for staying with me. I know it's been a long run, but again, I've had a really updated a video or uploaded a video in about a month or so. So thank you for sticking with me. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You know what to do, everyone. And like I always say, my friends, please read your book cover to cover. We'll see y'all later.